When we're talking about the Welland Canal, we kind of have to go back and look at the history of commerce and trade in Canada. So going back to 1600, the fur trade was actually the first commerce that was done with the indigenous people, and I guess most of it the French and the British. Samuel de Champlain was the first French explorer that started trading fur with the natives on the east coast of Canada, and that was around 1608. One of the interesting facts about the fur trade was that actually most of the women did the trading with the early trappers, and the men basically did the hunting and the women did the trading, and that seemed to work out quite well for them. Now, it was got to be quite obvious that early on that transporting the goods for trade across waters was quite cumbersome, and especially the ships could not go all the way up into the Great Lakes, so it using canoes, which the natives were helping them out quite a bit, but it was a bit of a challenge. Going overland by horse and buggy obviously had its challenges too, especially there was no highways to motor on, so it was a rough go. This map shows where in eastern Canada most of the beaver trade was done, and it shows you basically the lakes, as Great Lakes as well. So the trade was really right into the heart of the country of Ontario. As time went on, there was more immigrants, more commerce, and it got to a point where there was not just the fur trade anymore. It was to be several other products. I guess one of them was the forest industry. It was a huge amount of trees that were cut down and exported to Europe. Now, one of the problems was because in order to get into the upper lakes, you had to basically get around the rapids. So there was the rapids in Montreal, in Lachine, and of course then there's Niagara Falls. You couldn't get around. So in the 1800s, there was a big effort to start building several canals. There was the Trans-Severn Water Canals that had, I think, again, about 60 blocks. And then there's the Rideau Canal going up to Montreal. So the ships would come up from Montreal up the Ottawa River, and then transported onto the Rideau Canal, then down, and then back up the Trent Canal. On the American side, we had the Erie Canal, and then up the Hudson River, and there's quite a bit of commerce going up that way, and going through the Channel de Jamblique. So trade was expanding, and also this was a time when they started thinking about building the Welland Canal. Now, the present day Welland Canal has 8 locks, but actually this is the 4th version. There was earlier canals that got built, and obviously every time they expanded. Now, the Welland Canal is also part of the big picture, which is all the St. Lawrence Seaway that connected the more locks to the Atlantic. As you can see in this map, from Lake Superior, there was one lock from Lake Superior into Lake Huron or Lake Michigan, and then you go down to Detroit and the Lake Erie being the most shallow lake. But then there was a big drop having to deal with the Niagara Falls, and then further east there was in the St. Lawrence River, there was a few locks that the ships have to navigate before they can go out in the Atlantic. As you can see on the map how deep Lake Superior is compared to the other lakes. So it's a huge amount of water there. Now here we can see the different timelines to when the actual construction, the use of the canal was. Phase 1 was from 1824 to 1845, and then the second phase was 1845 to 1887. The third was from 1887 to 1932, and then of course the last phase is what the present day canal is. Now you can probably imagine that these undertakings took a lot of manpower, a lot of laborers. And in the early phases of the Welland Canal, there was mostly Irish, Scottish, Germans, and some American immigrants. And apparently, one of the problems they had with the Irish, that they actually had to separate the Protestants from the Catholics because they just couldn't get along. In the third phase, there were predominantly Italians, Russians, Ukrainians, Austrians, Polish, and basically mostly Caucasians from Europe, different parts of Europe, and they did the task. But again, it was hard work, and I'm sure that there was a lot of casualties. Among the casualties, there were some other sad stories, like the death of William James Gordon. He was crushed by a construction train in 1924. He left behind 6 children who mourned his death. They were raised by the eldest son, as their mother had died 2 years earlier of tuberculosis. Or then the Lynches, MacArthurs, and Bassetts. Each suffered a loss of father and son. 2 of these events occurred on the same calendar day near the same location during separate years. On August 1st, 1925, Elzar and Leo Lynch died at Lock 6, followed by James and James Campbell MacArthur on August 1st, 1928 at the same location. The third father-son duo died in Port Colborne in 1929, and Francis Fernley Bassett and William Francis Bassett perished. The father witnessed his son's death when his body was crushed between the arm of a crane and the car of a Clarence Street lift bridge. 6 months later, the senior Bassett was crushed to death by the bridge's huge concrete counterweight, only 50 yards from where his son met his untimely death. And then there was Michael Onijuk. He was one of the last killed 7 days before the canal officially opened in 1932. It was his first day on the job, and he died within an hour of arrival at the job site. Workers were clearing trees but were too close to the canal channel near Ellenberg, where the very first tree fell the wrong way, crushing Onijuk, who had begun to flee. Despite having a fractured spine, broken leg, and internal injuries and a severe shock, he made it to the general hospital but died just as his wife arrived. So pretty sad stories, but I guess those are one of the reasons why we have workers' compensation and a lot of more safety rules. Now this is the only thing that's left from the first canal. It's not a very big one, and obviously back then in that period of time they didn't really need a big one. The second phase of the canal was a little more generous and made a little wider, and now as you can see there's a lot more taller walls, so they got some larger barges to be able to travel the canal. but compared to today's canal, it's obviously still pretty small, but considering that it probably is all dug by hand, it's quite a credit to those poor workers. This is a painting from the first ship that came through the Welland Canal in the early days. Now this probably must have been probably when they had the second or third phase of the Welland Canal, but that seems a rather large sail ship that come through, not just also for the depth. And I'm surprised that there's nobody there actually pulling it, because I would think you wouldn't be able to sail up the canal. So anyway, but it does make for a nice painting.